Hey everyone, Chrissy at Pinovate. Thank you so much for joining us for our Adventure Awaits Mountain Scene tutorial. So we have collaborated with Lines by Lacey for this project, and it always turns out so beautifully. So follow along and we'll make it together. Okay, so in your kit you have a whole bunch of goodies. So you're going to have a wooden tray, 14 pieces of wood that make our mountain scene. You're going to have a vinyl stencil, sandpaper, E6000 glue, a little makeup sponge, some foam brushes for painting, an assortment of paint, an instruction guide, and the only other things that you might need would be some masking tape, paper towel, and some scissors. So grab all of your stuff and we'll get started. So our very first step of our project is we need to sand all of our wood pieces down. I'm going to start with my tray, and I want to make sure that there's no slivers or splinters anywhere on here, and all of the wood is nice and smooth to the touch. So with my sandpaper, I'm just going to get started. I want to make sure I get all of the edges, and if you want to get into that small little crack in there, what I like to do is actually fold the sandpaper so I can get right in that corner. So let's get started. So I have finished sanding my board and it is ready to go. The next step is we still need to sand our mountain pieces to make sure that these are nice and soft to the touch as well. So what I like to do is I like to organize all of my pieces according to the template on here. So they're all numbered and the numbers are facing up. Okay, so when I'm sanding, I like to go piece by piece. Now these numbers do need to be removed because we have to paint on this side. So you can either take your sticker and place it on the back so you know, or you can remove your sticker and just use a pencil mark and write that number on the back as well, just so you have reference of what this piece is going to be. So you're going to sand all of your mountain pieces now so they're soft to the touch. And I like to work piece by piece and keep them all organized, just so it's simpler when we are painting and organizing later. So I have sanded all of my mountain pieces. They are nice and soft to the touch. And I'm actually just gonna move these off to the side, but I'm gonna keep them in this formation just so it's easier to organize them later on when we're assembling them. All right, so we are ready to start painting our board. Now there's a couple different ways that you can do this, and it's completely up to you what you prefer. So with this one, we painted the background and we painted the inside edge as well. However, we left the outside edge blank and just a natural wood. Or alternately, you can actually paint the entire thing as well. So you could do the back as well as the whole edge, all one color if you prefer. Or on this sample, we did only the back and then the edge on the inside is white as well. So in this one, we taped off the edge here, painted the background. When it was dry, we taped off the inside and then painted the opposite. So whichever you prefer, it's completely up to you how you would like your tray to look. Okay, so I decided for my tray, I'm going to have a gray wash on my backboard here, and then I'm going to have a black edge all the way around. And then I think my mountains are gonna be white. So for my paints, I actually just have white and black, but I'm gonna show you a few different things that you can do with just those two colors. Okay, so I want to create my gray wash. So to make gray, I'm going to mix some black and some white together. I'm gonna take mostly white, and then just a tiny little drip of black. You don't need much at all. And then I'm going to mix those together until I find the shade that I like. All right, so I have found the shade of gray that I like by mixing my black and white together. Now I want to create a wash. So to do that, I'm actually going to add water to my paint. So it's going to have more of a stain effect. So I have a little bit of water. I'm just going to add that into my paint. And I'm going to continue to mix. I want it to be quite runny and to have kind of the consistency of a stain. So no lumps or bumps or clumps in here. I'm just gonna keep mixing until it is nice and thin and runny. And I'm gonna keep adding water until it's the correct consistency that I'm looking for. Okay, so I've created my wash. You can do this with any color at all. It can be pink or blue or green, any color. So it's quite liquidy, quite runny, it's nice and thin, and then this is going to be good to create our wash on the background. Okay, so how to use our wash is we're going to use our foam brush. I'm going to take a little bit of my wash here, my stain alternative, I suppose. I'm going to put it right onto my backboard, and then with my paper towel, I'm gonna wipe it off. So you're still going to see through the color, and you're still gonna see all that grain, but it's gonna have a tint of gray to it. Okay, and then I'm gonna take it and wipe it off. Okay, so you can still see all of this wood grain in here, but it has a nice texture to it, and that's gonna be perfect for my backboard. So I'm just gonna continue with this. Again, you can use any color you like, whatever color you choose for your base, or alternatively, you can just paint it a solid color as well, straight out of the paint tube. So I have finished my gray wash on my back here. I'm gonna set this aside to dry, but remember, you can do anything on your background. You can make a sunset if you wanted. You could do ombre colors. You could do just a solid white if you wanted. Keep it nice and simple. It's completely up to you how you want your tray to look. So have fun creating it. Okay, so I've set my tray board aside to let that dry. Now I'm gonna work on my mountains. So again, I've kept them in the right shape so I can keep them organized as I'm going. So for my mountains, I'm just gonna paint these plain white. So here is my paint tray again. I'm gonna go straight into my white with my foam brush, and I'm just gonna put a nice thin coat and also along the edges as well. We want to make sure that it is thin to make sure that it dries properly and quickly. If it is too thick, it's not going to dry properly, and you're going to have clumps and lumps and bumps on there. So make sure it is a nice thin coat. Do one coat, let it dry, and if you think it needs a second coat, go ahead and do a second coat, but make sure that it's dry in between. So I have finished painting all of my mountain pieces. I'm gonna just move them to the side and let them dry. I've done mine white, but you can do yours any color. You could do them black, you could do them rainbow, you could do them ombre, you could do them gray with white mountain peaks if you wanted, or you could actually just leave them the natural wood color. It's completely up to you how you want them to look. Okay, so my mountains are set aside drying, and I'm back to my board. So my base here is dry. We want to make sure that it's dry before we move on. Okay, so now I'm going to paint my edge. I'm going to do mine black and just have a nice solid edge. I'm not going to do a wash, it's just going to be straight acrylic paint. but I want to protect where I have already painted. So with my masking tape, I'm just going to put a little barrier, just like you're painting your walls at your home, so I don't bleed black over onto my base here. So I just want to tape out all of the inside edge before I start painting. Okay, so I have prepped my board. I have masking tape all along the inside edge here, and I'm going to paint my edge black. So just with my straight black paint, I'm going to use my foam brush and do a nice thin coat, just like we did on our mountains. So now when I do the inside edge, I just want to be very careful that I'm not putting too much paint and that it's bleeding over my tape. Okay, so I have finished the edge of my tray here. I have the inside edge, the top, as well as the outside edge finished. I'm gonna set this aside to dry before I peel off my tape. Okay, so I'm back to my mountains now. So these have completely dried and they're good to go as they are. These can be used as a finished product, but if you wanted to add a little bit of texture to them, I'm gonna show you two different ways. Okay, so the first way, we are actually going to add a slightly darker edge around it. Okay, so I have mixed a gray that is a little bit darker than my background because I want it to stand off. I don't want it to blend in. And I'm just going to gently go in with my brush, take a little tiny bit of paint right on the tip, and I'm just going to feather the edge very, very gently. Just barely touching the edge of my board here. Okay, and that's gonna add a little bit of dimension to all of your pieces. Alternately, if you happen to have a brush at home, any type of dry brush, you can actually go in and dry brush that on as well. Okay, you add a little bit and then you're gonna use a dry brush and rub. And that's just gonna kind of soften the edges for you, okay? And then the third way you can actually add a little bit of texture to it is back with your sandpaper. If you go in and just rub the edge right off, you're gonna see some of that natural wood coming through the bottom. Okay, so that's gonna give you a little bit of a different texture. But these are optional, you don't have to do them, but you are absolutely welcome to do them to add a little bit of pop to your mountains. Okay, so I chose to sand my pieces of my mountain. I like the look of seeing the wood through the bottom there. So I've sanded all my pieces and I'm just gonna place these to the side and grab back my board. Okay, so I'm back to my board and my edge has dried. So I could potentially do the same technique that I did on the mountains. I could sand the edges to give it more of a rustic look, or I could even do a white dry brush along here to make it pop a little bit. But you do whatever you like on your board, it's completely up to you. I'm gonna leave mine solid for today. So the next step is I'm going to peel off the tape on the inside. If there's any spots that have bled underneath your tape, now would be a good time to touch them up before we move on. So the next step is to work with our vinyl stencil. So with your scissors, you're going to cut out each section. So I want to have my words separate and both sets of my tree separate. But when I'm cutting in between, I want to try to cut right in the middle so I have enough vinyl left on either side. All right, so I have all of my pieces of vinyl separated. I have 3. Now I'm going to kind of place them and figure out where I want to put them. So I've placed my mountains back in my tray just so I have a reference of where the spacing is going to be. So okay, so I kind of like this layout here. I'm going to pull out my mountain pieces now, and I'm going to show you how to apply our vinyl stencils down. Okay, so I have my stencils placed where I would like them to go. So to use a stencil, it is like a great big sticker, okay? But it has a front, it has a middle, and it has a paper backing. So it's like a sticker sandwich. So to get this onto our board, there's a 3-step process, okay? So we want to take a scraper of some sort. So if you have a butter knife or a rewards card or a credit card, you want something with a flat edge that you can put some pressure on. So the first thing we're gonna do is scrape our whole vinyl down and get all of the air bubbles out. Okay, doing that is going to make the vinyl stick to our clear transfer tape on top. So at this moment, we want to peel off our paper backing. Okay, so this paper backing is going to come off. If you find any spots are still sticking to the paper, you just want to give them another press and rub down to make sure that they stick to the clear transfer tape on top. There we go. Now when you're peeling, just be patient with it. Sometimes it takes a couple minutes to do, but the more time you take, the better it's going to turn out. Okay, so now I'm ready to place mine down. I want mine about here. And I'm just gonna place that down just like a sticker, and I want to make sure that there's no air bubbles in there, so I'm just gonna give it a nice little press down. Now with your scraper, you're going to do the same thing as before and make sure that that vinyl is going to stick to the board now. All right, so now this vinyl's on my board, I need to peel off this clear transfer tape. So to do that, you're just going to peel it like a sticker, but instead of pulling up and off, I want you to roll it back. So this is going to help keep that vinyl stuck to your board and make sure that all those tiny little pieces don't come up as well. So again, if you find that any of those small pieces are coming off onto your clear transfer tape, just give it another rub and squish it down. But it works best if you do like a rolling back on itself motion. Okay, so that's on there now. So the last step I want to do is I want to make sure that when I'm painting on top of here that it's not going to bleed over onto my edge. So I'm just going to put a little border of masking tape around it to protect the rest of my board. Okay, so I have my masking tape on there and I'm ready to paint. So before I paint, I'm going to prep all of my stencils where I want to put them, and we're ready to go. So remember, for yours, if you only want to do the words, you can. If you only want to do one set of trees, you can. This is completely up to you how you want this to look. You're not obligated to use all 3 pieces. So I can't wait to see how it turns out. I have all of my stencils prepped and ready to go, and now I am ready to paint. So I'm keeping mine very monochromatic, black, gray, and white. So I'm going to do these in black as a silhouette, but you can do yours any color. And remember, you can always do like a darker on the bottom. You can add a bit of white so it ombres to the top. You can do this however you want. But here's the technique. So we are going to use our makeup sponge, okay? And on this very, very flat square back here, I'm going to take just a little bit of my black paint. So this less is more in this instance, okay? So I'm taking a little bit and then I'm gonna dab most of it off because I don't want very much on here at all. Now, I'm going to go straight on to my words here, but instead of painting back and forth like with a brush, I'm going to go straight up and down. And that's going to help prevent the paint from bleeding underneath so we get nice crisp lines. Okay, so with my very, very small amount, I'm going straight up and down. Okay, and then once that paint starts to run out in my sponge, then I will go ahead and get a little bit more. And remember, less is more. Okay, I can always do one coat of this, let it dry, and do a second coat. If you end up putting too much paint on your first coat, it's gonna be very tricky to peel off your stencil afterwards, especially all of those tiny little pieces on the inside. So again, nice thin coat, let it dry, and then do a second coat. Okay, so I have finished painting my black on my stencils, but I think I'm gonna do a gradient on my trees instead. So keeping it with black, I mixed a dark gray, and I'm going to do the same process, just a tiny bit of paint, but I'm gonna put this at just the top of my trees. I have finished painting all of my stencils. Now I get to peel everything off. To get any of those tiny little spots on the inside of the letters, you could use a toothpick or a bamboo skewer, something that's quite pointy. Or as long as it's dry, you can actually just use your fingernails. All right, so I have peeled all my stencil. I'm very happy with how it looks. If you find that any of your paint has bled underneath, this is where you can go in with a fine tip brush and touch it up before we move on. I have assembled my mountain pieces in my tray, and I'm loving how it's looking. It's looking great. So you have an option here. You can either use your mountains with all of the pieces like this, or you can actually take away the two outside pieces. So this one here and this one here, and you can actually have a smaller set of mountains. So I like the smaller set. I'm gonna go with this one. If you prefer the big one, you do that. All right, so now I'm on to my last step. I'm going to glue all of my mountain pieces into my tray. So with your tube of V6000 glue, this is more than enough for your whole tray. You're going to use just a small amount on the back, 2 little dots, that's it. And you're gonna place it where you want it, okay? So with this glue, it takes about half an hour to set. So you do have some wiggle room as you're gluing it down, but then we need to let it sit for half an hour before we move on. So I have glued all of my mountain pieces in where I want them, and now I'm just gonna let it set for half an hour. Thank you so much for following along. Our adventure awaits, mountain scene. I hope you had a great time making it with me. And we would love to see how they turn out. So if you could take a picture of your project and tag us at Pinovate and DIY Delivery, we would love to see it. And follow us on Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and Pinterest and Facebook, all of the things. So thanks again for following along.